By decree, you are commanded to vacate this land immediately.
Please, we need more time.
You stole our water!
We must share what little we have.
Everyone, form a line now.
You must let her live.
Thank you.
A child lay face down on the cobbles beside the well. Aldo dropped his bucket and lifted the boy by the elbow. Suspicion tightened his hands when he dipped the pail and saw the surface hold an oily sheen. The water smelled of iron and damp leather. People at the well pushed and muttered. The immediate danger was clear. The town's main supply had changed, and many had already drunk that change. Aldo's suspicion moved him before words did. He tested the pail with his thumb, let the liquid trickle over his skin, and watched the color smear into the stone. Marta shoved through the crowd. Marta's hands were quick and blunt. She pressed a cloth to the child's mouth and barked a demand for stronger broth. "We must not give more to the inn," she said, naming a need and a fault with the same breath. The crowd held its breath like an animal listening for a snap. Aldo had carried water for 20 years. He knew wells by sound and taste. He knew the weight of a fresh spring in a new leather pail, and he knew when a barrel had been refilled with river water. He also knew the cost of clean water in coin and in favors. He straightened, pushed the crowd aside, and checked the rope. The rope had been frayed in one spot. That detail tugged on him like a second suspicion. If the rope failed, more bodies might lie beside the stones. Felix the market merchant had 2 stalls away. He kept a face practiced against need. Aldo caught Felix between counting coins and licking a hose of cloth. Aldo stepped up and pressed his palm on the stall rail. "Felix, Aldo, what did you bring from the river this morning? Did someone sell you river water?" Felix blinked, then smiled like a blade. "Aldo, you always start with me. The river gives what it gives. People barter the rest. Why do you look at my barrels?" Marta cut in. "Felix, the child, look. He stumbles from your side of the market every other dawn." Felix folded his hands. "Marta, I sell what the merchants bring. I do not pour water in people's mouths. I sell ale and salt and grain. If you want clean water, you can buy from Thomas's house." Aldo felt anger rise as a tightness in his chest. He pressed the pail to his hip and kept his voice level. "Thomas locks his cistern. Thomas charges for it. My neighbor cannot pay. You know that, Felix? You know Marta's boy has a fever already." Felix's mouth thinned. "Aldo, nobody sells for free. If you want better, bring better coin. Or bring better suppliers. I cannot reroute the river." They traded sharp lines for a few sentences. The exchange unraveled who had power over water. It showed Aldo where the town's edges lay. The crowd split into mutters and hard little plans. Aldo listened to the market's small cruelties and felt the first change in his mood. Suspicion curved into anger. He moved on with that anger tucked like a stone in his pocket. The brewhouse sat behind a lean of smoke and steam, barrels stacked against the wall. Brewmaster Hand stood over the great pot, steering with a long paddle. The room smelled of wet grain and wood smoke. Aldo stepped in and set his pail down without asking. "Han, Aldo, the well is fouled. Children are sick." Han wiped her arms on her apron and glanced toward the door that led to the back room where a family waited. "Aldo, I have half a barrel left. It is thin. I cannot feed every throat and keep my ovens hot. What do you want me to do?" Aldo watched her hands. They moved like a clock. "Share. Hold back the weak all for the sick. Do not sell it to Felix for coin today." Hannah's face tightened. "If I spare these jugs, my apprentices will go hungry. If I sell them, I cover the malt. Choose, Aldo. Choose for them too." Aldo hesitated and his hands found the satchel under his cloak. He counted coins with a thumb. The motion was small and deliberate. He offered a handful and set them on the counter. "Keep it. Give me 2 jugs to carry to Marta's Lane. I will take the loss." Han accepted the coins with a look that mixed gratitude and worry. "All right, 2 jugs. Bring them quickly. The brewhouse decision shifted the town's options. Where water tasted foul, brewed drinks became a survival strategy. People trusted boiled or fermented liquids because the heat or the yeast killed what they could not see. In places where spring water ran clear, all still kept its place at the table. In the market, that logic turned into choices about who ate and who did not. Aldo left with one jug tucked under each arm and a small sense of relief. He had turned money into medicine for a family. He had chosen whose need might be relieved. The relief lasted only until a girl in a ragged cloak slipped a finger into his sleeve and whispered a name. "There is a spring outside the gate," she said. "My brother went yesterday. He water sat like a bowl in the moss. It was clean until the rain." Aldo looked at the girl. Her eyes darted like a bird's. He remembered the early mornings when his wife had walked the road to gather herbs beyond the wall. He remembered the stubborn habit of checking any new source twice. His suspicion returned and mutated into hope. He led Marta and the girl toward the outer wall. They walked past the garden plots, across a rut that once held a stream, and then climbed a short bank. The spring lay under a flat of stone. At first glance it looked whole. Then Aldo crouched. He put his hand to the surface and found a film of runoff and a broken wooden slat set across the inlet. Someone had tried to block access. Marta hissed. Someone guarded it. Someone kept others away. The young neighbor shoved a small wooden token forward and said, "My brother said a man left it there. The man would take what he wanted and tell the rest to go back." Aldo tasted the water with his lips, then coughed. It carried the bitter tang of iron and the faint rank of animal hair. The spring had been foaled by runoff from the new road above it. The hope that led them here twisted into a new problem. Now the town had another contested site. Marta set her jaw. "Then we asked Thomas. He stores water in his cistern. He must do something." They went to the priory's gate at dusk, where Brother Thomas kept watch over a private cistern that served a wealthy household and, on occasion, the priory. Thomas met them by the stone arch with 2 guards planted behind him. The smell of boiled herbs lingered on his sleeves. Thomas leaned on the arch and regarded them coolly. "Brother Thomas, Marta, the well is poisoned and the spring is fouled. The town needs your cistern." Thomas' hands folded like a man arranging a ledger. "My store is finite. It is also in service of those who pay the priory. I cannot release water without compensation. You know the rules." Aldo's mouth went dry. "What compensation? We have little. We have children with fever. We have a mother who cannot warm her oven. Do you expect coin for life when we are desperate?" Thomas's face remained plain. "Aldo, I have duties. I have those who rely on the cistern. If I open it for everyone, none will have enough. I can offer a trade. I can give you 2 barrels if you provide labor for the priory fields for 7 days. Marta spat a sound that might have been a curse. 7 days for 2 barrels. "Thomas, you know my son cannot half pay for a loaf. You know what 7 days means for us in harvest season." Thomas lifted a finger. "I do not make the laws. I enforce what we must. If you refuse, the alternative is to buy from Felix or to take it without permission." The line hung between them. Aldo counted options in his head like stones: steal, bargain, buy, or accept that people would get ill. His anger sharpened and changed shape into a hard, pragmatic decision. He caught Marta's look. Her eyes held the same calculation. "If the trade is the only lawful path, Aldo, we will take it. But if the cost is lives, Brother Thomas, then the law turns away from its purpose. It becomes a tax on breathing." Thomas looked away toward the priory doorway. A guard shifted. "Do what you must, Thomas, but know what theft will bring. Guards will act." They left with no barrels and a new edge of fear under their feet. On the walk back, Aldo changed his plan. He would not accept 7 days of labor for a single week of safe water when a child could die tomorrow. He set his jaw and gathered a small group of neighbors under Marta's quiet prompting. They would try the cistern gate that night. Aldo moved like a man slowing his breath. He and Joran the plan in low sentences. He named who would fetch ropes, who would watch the guard posts, and who would carry water. Each person touched their tools. Silence fell like the closing of a door. The group's mood shifted from suspicion and anger to a focused determination. Han handed over an extra jug without asking more than once. Night crept in with lamplight and a thin mist. The priory yard smelled of tallow and damp straw. Aldo and the small party crept to the high wall and found the gate latched. A single guard paced beneath a lantern. Joran signaled with a finger. Marta breathed out and launched the first move. They forced the lock. The metal gave with a dull snap. The guard shouted and ran. The noise pulled other feet. Brother Thomas came out in his robe, shouting the quickest words he knew. A scuffle began in the yellow pool of lamplight. Wood hit flesh, and the sound of a broken bone was not like any other sound. It made people catch their breath. Joran cried out as he fell. A blade nicked his arm. A neighbor shoved a barrel and it rolled, exposing the clean water within. For a second, no one moved. The sight of the clear surface sent a new shock through the group. Someone laughed thinly. Someone wept. Aldo grabbed a pail and worked quickly. He felt a hard, focused adrenaline. He filled one container, then another. He heard Marta call out names to assign water. Han, here, she said. Joran, hold that pail. Thomas, get back to your gate. Brother Thomas tried to intervene. You will answer for this! He shouted. Aldo did not answer. He kept filling and passing and sealing corks with hands that shook. The guard cuffed someone across the shoulder, and that person fell. A small neighbor, old Kester, hit his head and slumped. The scene turned raw and urgent. The crowd outside the priory heard the scuffle and pressed closer. They had wanted water. Now they saw its cost. In the end, they carried away 3 barrels. They left a guard with a broken wrist and Joran with a shallow cut. Kester was set to the side with a cloth on his head. The town had paid with bruises and panic. They gathered in the market square under a single brazier. Aldo organized rations with a voice that did not allow argument. He measured with a clay cup. 2 cups for the sick, he said. 1 cup for each child. 1 cup for those who work the road. No more until we find more. Han stepped forward. Aldo, I will keep brewing thin ale and hold it back for the mothers and the fevered. Marta, can you keep watch on the children tonight? Marta nodded, but she did not smile. Yes, I will walk the alleys. I will check every open door. Felix came to the edge of the circle. He put 2 coins on the ground and looked away. I will not sell more water today, he said. I will not profit by this. Take the coins, Han. Keep the prices steady. Do not starve us in exchange for saving us. Aldo felt a fragile truce settle like dust. The group divided the barrels into small allotments. Mothers carried clay cups and hobbled back to narrow rooms. A neighbor with a lantern walked to Joran and bound the cut with thread. Kester was lifted and carried to a bed. The violence had been a single violent pulse. Now the town returned to its slow, practical tasks of care. In the first light, Aldo walked alone through the empty lanes. He carried nothing now. The clay cup he had used earlier was empty and warm under his fingers. He stopped at a low window and set the cup on the sill. He did not think of grand outcomes. He thought of small things. The cloth Marta used to staunch a cut, the way Han had refused to sell the last jug, the brief look Felix gave when he placed coins down. A cart rattled in the distance. A woman opened her door and stepped into a strip of sunlight to check on her child. The town would live by ration, barter, and 100 small indignities for a while. Aldo's suspicion had led to action that made him sorely aware of the trade-offs, of the theft that saved lives and the hurts it left behind. He heard Marta call his name. She stood in the doorway with a blanket over her arm. Aldo, she said, we will watch tonight. We will keep watch till the water runs clear or till Thomas yields. For now, fill your lungs and sleep in shifts. The fevered must not be left alone. Aldo nodded. He felt weariness like a second skin, but he also felt something close to relief that people moved, hands busy and practical. He did not claim victory. He only organized buckets and names. He wrote down chores by the light of a wavering lamp, his handwriting steady and tight. He left the empty cup on the windowsill and walked away. The cup waited there as the day opened. It held no promise. It held a small, concrete record. Someone had used it. Someone had shared a jug of ale. Someone had chosen to break a lock. The town would sleep in shifts with this decision between its teeth. The morning moved on with tasks and lists, and the measured sounds of people keeping one another alive. Aldo kept walking until the lane turned and hid the priory from view. He breathed cold air and felt the back of his throat tighten. He had changed the path of one night. He had also watched a neighbor fall. He could not fix both facts at once. He tightened his cloak and moved toward the place where Marta and Han would gather names for the next watch. The day's decisions would be small and constant. They would test patience and charity over and over. The cup on the sill gleamed faintly, and the town began to count out its days. A guild warden grabbed one of Aldo's pails and shoved it toward him. "Where did you take this water?" Matteo, voice tight and low, fingers scraping the rim. Aldo tightened his grip on the yoke. Suspicion settled across his shoulders like a wet cloak and moved his hands before his mind. The crowd at the gate pressed in. A woman muttered that the pail smelled of river iron. A boy stepped back and coughed. Matteo pushed the pail closer to his face and frowned at the dark sheen along the inside. Aldo stepped forward and put both palms flat on the wood. "I filled it at the common well, Aldo. I paid the toll." His voice held the steady, worn cadence of someone who had carried water for years. He tested the weight of the other pail with his foot. The metal made a dull ring. Matteo's jaw worked. "You were out past the bridge at dawn," he said. "We had reports. You know the rules." He jabbed a finger toward the road. The accusation landed like a stone. Aldo tasted the metallic edge of the pail's smell under his tongue and felt the old suspicion flare into something harder. Aldo had seen that smell before. He remembered the child on the cobbles by the well from earlier that week, the boy lying face down with the rim of the bucket damp against his cheek. That image lived as a concrete fact in his hands. The boy's hair stuck to his forehead, the oily line on the water's surface, Aldo hauling him upright and feeling the child's ribs move again. The memory pushed at him now. It made the accusation matter. People around the gate shifted. Lissa reached for a corner of Aldo's cloak and did not speak. Her face was pale. Aldo looked at her, then at Matteo. He could feel every coin's weight in his satchel, as if the leather counted his choices. "Aldo, Matteo, show me your papers." The warden's tone left no room for argument. He stepped back from the gatehouse and set the barrel of his staff against the stones. Around them, a few citizens tuned closer, eyes searching for scandal. Aldo produced a crumpled receipt from inside his jacket and handed it over. Matteo unfolded it with one quick motion and scanned the ink. The numbers matched, but Matteo's mouth stayed hard. "Tickets don't say where you pulled it from, Matteo." He tapped the pail. "This reeks of the river. The river is unregistered. You know the levy?" The warden named the law and the cost, as if reciting a prayer. A woman in the queue cried out, "My child is burning with fever!" Lisa pushed forward, one arm wrapped around a small bundle. The child's face was flushed. The mouth opened and closed with quick, rattling breaths. "Please, Aldo." "Anything. Please." Her voice was thin and urgent. Aldo's hands went to the pail. He hesitated. Suspicion turned into doubt, then into a pull at his ribs. The choice between coin and life. He could sell this water. He could keep his ledger balanced for another week. Or he could give the cup that might ease a fever and see his own family go without. "Lisa." Aldo quietly, "Where does it hurt?" He lowered the pail and the child's mother tilted the bundle. The child's skin burned like the coals of a hearth left too close to cloth. Aldo felt a steadiness arrive, not an answer, but a necessary movement. Matteo stepped between them. "You can just hand it out. You know the fines." He fixed Aldo with a look that sought to pin him to law instead of need. Lisa's voice rose. Matteo, please. She is small. She will die. Her words trembled and landed directly on the warden's features. There was a short silence where breath counted for seconds. Aldo set down the pail and dug into his satchel. He pulled a cup and, with hands that did not shake, he dipped and ladled a small portion into the tin. 1 cup. He said, boil it first. Take it hot. The action made the choice concrete. He was giving away something he could have sold. Matteo made a noise of disapproval. 1 cup, 1 tea, change the rules. He jabbed the staff again at the ground. Aldo kept his eyes on Lisa. It might change this child's night, Aldo. They moved to the narrow alley beside the communal well. Lamps smoked low. A woman, healer Mara, had a kettle blackened from years of use and a rack of herbs hanging in rough bunches. Mara's hands worked with the motion of someone who had been handling sick bodies for decades. She took the cup, held it up to the lamplight, and smelled it. This has river iron, Mara. She set the cup down and did not reach for it again. Boil it, add mugwort. Let it sit for 10 minutes. She looked at the child and felt at the pulse. She frowned and then gave a small, precise set of instructions. Warm compresses, rest, a week, all toasted with an eyes for the stomach. Her voice did not carry hope. It carried tools. Lisa clutched at Mara's sleeve. Do you think she'll live? She asked. Mara's hands paused. If we had more clean water and more fuel, I'd do more. Right now there is 1 small pot, 1 small brew. We will try. She tied the child's shirt and looked at Aldo. Do you have anything else? She asked. Aldo, nothing. He felt the ledger's line of numbers like a stick in his chest. He could hear the merchants' voices at the market, the way they spoke of coin and fines. He felt the smell of oil from the tavern 2 doors down, the warm, sore lift of fermentation that sometimes passed for drinkable water. That night, Aldo moved away from the well to the back room of a tavern-turned-market. A low man named Thomas kept a stock of odd barrels and odd favors. Thomas' eyes were quick and cold. His smile had the flatness of someone who had counted risk and profit more often than kindness. Aldo, Thomas. Once the door was shut. You look tired. He tapped a barrel with a knobby finger. I have a barrel of oil. Weak, but it will steady a child. And a map. He slid a folded scrap of paper onto the table. Not a proper map. A mark. A spring outside the walls. You bring coin, you bring a favor later. I supply. He expected a decision. Aldo felt a shift in himself. Doubt softened into calculation. He thought of Lisa's breath, the small body that had been hot in his arms. He thought of the earlier boy by the well. He thought of Matteo's staff, how far Aldo a walk at night, hidden in scrub, no patrols most nights, Thomas. He drank from a cup and then lowered it, but I can guarantee. You know the risk. The guild takes its dues if you recaught. Thomas let the quiet hang between them like a price. Aldo's voice was low. How much? He counted on his fingers, not letting the satchel show. Thomas named an amount that made Aldo's jaw clamp. He named a future favor in a way that implied it might not be paid for months. Aldo looked at the barrel again. The oil smelled of boiled grain and sugar. It promised warmth without the sickness. He bartered coin and a knot of small labor he owed. Thomas smiled and pushed the barrel to the corner. For a moment Aldo thought he had solved it. 1 barrel, 1 map, a child's breath saved. Then Matteo's patrol came down the lane. They were heavier than rumor. They hit the courtyard like a lock closing. Lights flashed as torches turned, and men in official badges stepped through the door. Thomas' face paled for a second, and then he tried to close the lid on the barrel and shove it under a bench. Matteo's voice cut the room. Thomas. I was told you were moving goods without registration. He came forward with 2 men and a ledger under his arm. He moved with the economy of someone used to making trouble stop quickly, open the barrels, show us the contents. He did not ask politely. Thomas cursed under his breath and pulled the lid. The men sniffed and frowned. One of Matteo's patrol shoved a hand into the barrel and pulled out a wooden cup filled with ale. He tasted it, then spat to the floor. Weak oil and cheaper water. Matteo, He pointed to Thomas. "You have no license. Confiscated. We'll levy a fine." He turned to Aldo. "And you carrier know the law. No unregistered sources. If you help him, you'll be counted as an accomplice." Matteo's gaze went straight to Aldo's satchel. Aldo felt his plan collapse. The barrel that might have saved a child's night was now a public spectacle. Thomas protested, then lowered his head. The soldiers began to roll the barrel away. A neighbor, someone who had stood quiet at the gate earlier, whispered something sharp to Thomas as the men worked. Aldo moved before he thought. He set his hands on the barrel. "Wait," he said, "we can pay a fine. I will take it and pay the fee. Let me buy it now." His words came quick. He pushed for a practical fix. Matteo's mouth twisted. "We cannot allow private distribution. The guild must regulate." He set his staff on the barrel again. "You think the rules are for show?" he hit plainly, as if hoping to shame Aldo into stepping back. Thomas swore and then, in a quick breath, offered a different bargain. "Matteo, you know where the spring is. You can keep people in line and get the goods. Or I can bring them one night and no one will know." He tried to smile as if forging an alliance. Matteo's eyes narrowed. "Thomas, these are valuable things. You do not bargain with the guild." His voice carried a warning. Thomas lowered his gaze. The barrel left. So did Thomas, blinking into the street with his face masked by shadow. Aldo watched him go and felt something new harden. Desperation. He had traded away possible safety for a map that now might be useless. He had traded small coin and a future favor, and now had nothing but a folded scrap that might lead him to a spring. He folded the scrap into his pocket with the same care he had once used to fold receipts. Night came with a damp that pressed against the city's back alleys. Aldo left his shoes at the gate and led a small group in a line along the outskirts where scrub met stone. He had invited Mara and Lisa to come. Mara carried a small satchel of herbs and a blackened pot. Lisa carried the child wrapped in quilts. They moved with soft steps to avoid patrols. As they crossed the old cart track, they heard hoofbeats. Aldo froze. Mara froze. Lisa tightened her hold on the child's quilt. 2 torches swung into view, and then 3 silhouettes filled the path. Matteo and 2 men came forward with a steady pace, their boots clacking on the stones. Aldo swallowed. He felt the shift from quiet fear to a decision that did not leave room for hesitance. He could turn back. He could hand the child to the guild and let them sort the rules. Or he could press on with midnight in his lungs and the spring spark in his pocket. "Aldo, Matteo, where are you going at this hour?" He did not ask for permission. He was measuring where guilt might show on Aldo's face. Aldo stepped forward and held up his hand. "To the spring," he said, "to help a child." His voice was steady. He made the choice physically by stepping past Matteo's men. Matteo moved to block the path, turned back. "You know the penalties." He reached for Aldo's arm. Lisa's voice cut in. "Matteo, please. The child's burning. Let them go." She stepped between the men. Her eyes were bright with something like pleading and accusation at once. Matteo hesitated for a heartbeat and then set his jaw. "One person to be searched," he said, "no more. If I find incriminating goods, I will take them and your protection will cost more than it did before." He looked at Aldo specifically. "Aldo. Don't make this worse." Aldo started forward. The group slipped past. They moved through scrub and low bramble toward the map's mark. Thomas's scrap had a crude notch by a leaning stone. The night air smelled of wet earth and crushed leaf. Aldo's hands were raw from gripping the yoke all day, and his steps were careful so as not to make noise. They found the spring under an overturned root and a slab of lichen. Water gathered there in a small hollow and glittered like a handful of tin coins when Mara bent a lamp close. It was not a fountain. It was a private scrape of clear water carved by rain and rock. Aldo knelt and cupped his hands. The water felt cold and clean against his palms. Then a twig snapped behind them. Boots on wet leaves. Matteo's patrol had closed faster than Aldo had thought. The men filled the path like a narrowing gate. There was no room to argue now. Aldo rose with the kettle and a single pail. He took in breath and did the practical work. He filled the pail, he strapped it. He handed Mara a small portion. Lissa held the child's head low and drank a warmed sip from a tin cup. The child coughed, and color moved back into the cheeks by a measure that could be counted. Less sweat on the forehead, slower breaths. Matteo arrived at the edge of the spring and looked at them. "You know it's forbidden," he said. He did not look surprised. There was an evenness to his voice that suggested he had hoped they would be far from his sight. Aldo met him. "We had no other choice," he spoke in short, clear lines. Matteo's eyes flicked to the water and then to the child. For a moment, the law and the life competed for his attention. He took a breath and then made a move that changed the balance. He stepped back and barked in order for his men to search the area. His tone hardened again. "You will be recorded. The guild will decide." Healer Mara lifted the child and pressed the warm cup between the small hands. The child's eyes fluttered open and focused on Mara's face. The small mouth tried a smile. That shift from danger toward relief was narrow, measurable. A lessened cough, a wetness around the eyes, fingers that no longer clutched the blanket into tight knots. Matteo held his ground. "We will record you, Thomas, for smuggling. Aldo, you will be fined for taking unregistered water." He read out possible penalties with the dryness of official doom. The men began to mark the moment. Then Thomas stepped from shadow. He had followed at a distance, and when he reached the group his face was slick with rain and fear. He looked at Matteo and then at Aldo. "I didn't know they'd take it tonight," he said. "I thought I could sell quietly." He shifted blame and then, in a motion that surprised everyone, he offered Matteo a sealed purse. Matteo's hand closed around the purse but did not open it. He looked at Thomas and then, in a voice low enough that Aldo had to lean forward to hear, he said, "You know the rules, Thomas. You know the cost of selling water. Why would you bring them here?" Thomas' mouth opened. He stammered, "I thought." He stopped. His eyes flicked to Aldo's face and then away. They begged. "I wanted to help. I thought I could trade it and repay a favor. I didn't mean for Matteo's men to find out." His voice knotted. For a moment the group hung between accusation and a small, human failure. Aldo realized something sharp. Thomas had not only sold the barrel, he had led someone from the city into a place that Matteo could track. The twist made the night's decisions look different. Matteo had not stumbled on them by luck. Someone had made a trade that tied the guild to Thomas' profit and to Aldo's desperation. Matteo's face hardened into a public magistrate's mask. "Thomas, you're coming with us. Aldo, you will present yourself at the levee." He turned his gaze to Mara and Lissa. "The child will be recorded as treated by a licensed healer. That will mitigate penalties." He sounded official, but his eyes lingered on the spring as if considering ownership. They walked back to the alleys with the child's breaths more even. Mara boiled a small ration and mixed mugwort into it. Lisa's hands shook as she fed the child the warmed drink. Aldo stood a little away and wiped his palms on his patched cloak. He felt relief and a new weight. The ledger of the night's choices. Neighbors gathered at the healer's doorway. They brought crusts of bread and small cups. They whispered thanks and worry in the same breath. Some looked at Aldo and then away. A few pressed coins into his hand with awkward clumsiness. Aldo turned to the post by his lodgings at dawn. He took out his notebook and wrote a crude mark where the spring lay. He folded the paper and tucked it under a small carved nail. He then pinned a scrap to the post, a warning written in hurried script and tucked beneath a scrap of oilcloth. It read in plain words a caution for anyone who might follow. He did not write triumph or declare victory. He recorded a fact, a place, a risk, a choice made to keep a child's breath moving through the night. He felt the mix of relief and dread coiled together. He closed his notebook and walked inside. Behind the door, his family slept. Outside, the city carried the night's change in ledger entries and rumor. Aldo stood in the doorway for a moment and then laid the pail down. He rubbed his thumb over a coin in his satchel until the metal felt familiar and dull. The child would wake warmer. The ledger would claim a fine. Thomas would vanish into the market, bargaining elsewhere. Matteo would report what he needed to, and the guild would do as it always did. Healer Mara rechecked the child's mouth and then nodded once. Lissa let out a breath that shook. Aldo felt the tension ease a little in his hands, but not all the way. He had eased one household's night. He had written a mark in a notebook and pinned a warning to a post. The act was concrete and small. It was the kind of closure that fit his life. A saved breath, a counted cost, a warning left where others might read it. Outside, the first cart went by and a dog barked. Aldo closed the door behind him with the same practical attention he gave to a strap or a pail. The night had changed them. It had not solved the city's thirst. He set the notebook on the table and, with a short, precise movement, circled the spring's mark and drew a small note beneath it. He wrote what he would carry forward, a scrap to guide the next choice and a caution to weigh the cost. That morning, as lamplight lost its last hold on the street, Aldo pinned the small warning carefully and walked back to the well with a face that held both fatigue and a kind of careful steadiness. He had traded coin, confronted a guild warden, bargained with a smuggler, and walked beyond the walls to carry water home. He had kept a small life from sliding away, and he carried the knowledge that such acts would always bring cost, risk, and decisions he would have to make again. Matteo's torch hit the reed bank as he shoved past the plants and demanded, "Where did you fetch this water?" Aldo tightened his grip on the leather yoke and held the pail between his knees, suspicion knotting his fingers before he answered. The spring's surface trembled under the pail, and a thin cold ran up Aldo's forearms. The question made the risk plain. If the warden claimed the source, families would go without. If Aldo handed it over, a feverish child might die that morning. Aldo's chest moved in a measured breath. He set the pail down with a soft thump and said, "Outside the wall, under the reeds." "I filled this for the child." His voice was low. The torchlight glanced off wet leather and the brass yoke. Droplets glimmered and fell. Within those first moments, the conflict stood up fully. Matteo, with his stamped parchment and a guild's authority, and Aldo, who had already lifted one child from the cobbles 3 days earlier. The narrator had described that earlier rescue. Now the same hands that plucked a limp child from the stones were weighed against a cloak of enforcement. A woman pushed through the reeds, her skirts damp, a child wrapped in a thin blanket against her chest. She held the child in both hands and demanded plainly, "Is there enough?" Aldo looked at the child's glass, grey face, and, without answering, checked the pail's rim for silt. Suspicion shifted into a colder, sharper urgency in him. He had seen the boy's lips dry in the market 2 nights past, and remembered the heavy breathing that had gone with that. He lifted the jar and turned toward the woman. "There is some, Aldo." He tilted the jar so she could cup water into the child's mouth. The child swallowed once, then twice. The mother's shoulders sagged by a fraction. Matteo stepped forward, parchment in hand, and the paper made a small dry sound as he unfolded it. He read as if the words were a weapon. "This spring is under city supervision. Matteo, all drawing requires a permit." "Where is your permit?" Aldo's jaw tightened. He did not have a permit. He had no coin for one. He had, instead, walked before dawn to a narrow trickle and carried what he could on his back. Rosa came out of the reeds then, small jar held like an offering. She moved with a steadiness that refused Matteo's glare. "Matteo," she said, "I tend this channel. I let a few households have a sip at dawn. I have been careful." Her voice was even, not pleading. Matteo's eyes narrowed. He set the parchment against his palm and said, "Tending is not permission. The charter is clear. Stop this diversion, Rosa." His tone flared with official certainty. The torchlight carved his face into hard planes. Aldo stepped between them and set the empty pail on the mud. He spoke with the blunt pragmatism he used at the market. "Rosa, the child needs a bright cup." Matteo, this is not for sale today. If you take it, the child will not live long enough for the court to hear a complaint. His hands were steady. The pail trembled only slightly. A quick exchange followed. Matteo's apprentice, a younger man with a scar on his brow, pushed up from behind the warden and spat a short line. He took it from the gate yesterday. We saw him. The apprentice's voice tried to sound certain. Rosa answered in the same beat. You saw him carry one bucket. You did not see where he put it. You did not see the jar on their sill at dusk. Her reply carried facts. Jars, early nights, borrowed hours. Matteo barked. Then bring the permits or I will seize the batches tonight. His words made the reeds ruffle. Aldo felt his chest beat faster. The urgency inside him sharpened into a need to protect the immediate life in front of him. He moved to open a small channel Rosa had coaxed out of the spring and worked the clay plug with a thumb. Water began to flow in a low, precise stream into a second jar. As the jar filled, an apprentice at the gate ran toward the city with clumsy, breathless steps. His departure made a thin alarm start to spread along the lane. Someone at the gate would call men. The parchment would be turned into a warrant. That movement was an external event that forced a recalculation. Speed now mattered. Aldo pressed the jar to the child's lips. The mother watched without speaking. Her fingers clutched the blanket so hard the cloth wrinkled. The child's eyes rolled once, then returned to a calmer set. The immediate crisis eased by a thread. But Matteo would not let the moment pass. He stepped to Rosa and produced his stamp again, then raised his voice where the reeds could not alone block sound. Rosa, you could be fined. You could be jailed. I will not allow private sharing to undermine the city supply. He kept his voice even, the way someone reads law. Rosa folded her hands around her jar. She did not lower her head. Matteo, she said clearly, the city supply is brackish. You know it. You know the wells smell of iron when the wind is from the south. People have been sick. I chose to let a handful draw at dawn because that is all we can give. You hold a parchment. I hold a jar that keeps a child alive. Which of those is the law for the living? Those words brought a reaction from the reeds. A man who had been waiting with a basket stepped forward, palms out. I will give grain for a jar, he said, if that keeps a child free a day. Take my bread. The voice cut through the formal words and made the dispute less abstract. A cluster of neighbors moved closer, some with empty cups, some with a spare jar or two. They brought the morning with them. A small tin cup, a chipped pitcher. Their approach changed the stakes. The argument was no longer only between Matteo and Rosa. It had become whether the community would accept the enforcement of a rule that would leave the weakest to die. Matteo's posture stiffened. He read aloud a line from the parchment about regulated drawing. The charter is for order, he said. The apprentice repeated the same phrase. The apprentice's words were short, as if practiced. Aldo felt suspicion shift in him again, suspicion into a hard defensiveness. He stepped closer and named concrete registration failures he had seen at the gate. Yesterday you seized a pail at the gate and turned it back only after coins changed hands. Aldo, you keep paper, Matteo. People keep hunger and fever. You can say you done know the trade. His voice did not waver. A hush settled. Neighbors glanced at one another. Someone near the wall cleared his throat and produced a small folded scrap of paper. This is a receipt. It has the city's seal and a mark from your own hand, Matteo. My wife paid 3 pennies for a permission note last week. He held it out for others to see. Matteo's face changed in a way that the torch could not hide. His jaw worked and a tightness gathered at his throat. He reached for the parchment and his fingers trembled a little. The apprentice swallowed and looked elsewhere. Matteo's authority faltered the first time. He sharply, that is not, and stopped. The neighbors hardened into expectation. The charge of payment for permission had shifted the balance. The official stance lost its weight when a visible, tradable receipt was held up. Rosa used that pause to offer a concrete alternative. She set her jar on the ground and spoke to the crowd in short lines. We will divide what comes at dawn. We will mark the jars. We will take no more than 2 jars each. Her voice moved into practical terms, counting marks, jars. Matteo tried to reassert the charter. You cannot simply redistribute as you please. His voice searched for the old certainty. Aldo cut in. Matteo, the law says order, not death. You can stand at the gate and watch, or you can help us carry jars back through. Which will you do? He looked at Matteo, then at the apprentice, then back to the wavering crowd. There followed a short, rapid exchange. Matteo, this is theft. Return it, Aldo answered. This is mercy. Keep your parchment and go home, Matteo. You defy the charter, Aldo. You have been defied by your own ledger. The apprentice interjected with a single line. We do not have time for this. Each line was brief, 3 to 10 words, and the back and forth cut tight. An unexpected moment changed the scene further. The apprentice, who had looked away, moved forward with 2 steps and said quietly, Matteo, there are names on the receipts. Names of men who sold permits last winter. They come from the Merchants' Guild. If you seize these jars, the merchant will claim the city is mismanaged. He looked Matteo in the eye. The apprentice's disclosure made Matteo hesitate again. That was a mid-chapter twist. Authorities' consistency had a seam. The apprentice line made the crowd listen to the ledger as if it were a living thing and not an abstract rule. It was specific and concrete. It named receipts merchant sales and the winter sales. The crowd's attention sharpened. Matteo's mouth tightened. The torchlight cast a line from his eyebrow to his chin. He folded the parchment and tucked it under his arm. I will investigate the receipts, he said, but for now the water must return to the city supply. His sentence tried to split the difference between law and action. Rosa answered with a single motion. She lifted the jar and walked to the gate, carrying the water like a badge. She moved under Matteo's torch and into the public line. Aldo followed with the child's jar. He kept his steps low and steady. At the gate a crowd had formed where none of this had been expected. Neighbors pressed close. Some raised voices, others only tilted their heads. The apprentice stayed near Matteo, chewing the inside of his cheek. The tension soared as men in the crowd began to demand sight of the receipts and to name people who had paid for permits. The exchange became unmistakably political. Matteo reached for the jar just as Aldo lifted it toward the child waiting at the gate. Stop. He tried to seize the jar and his hand closed halfway down the glass rim. Aldo stepped faster. He put the jar into the mother's hands and tipped it so the child could drink. The child's small fingers closed around the rim. Water ran down the child's chin and into the mother's cupped palm. People made noises, small sounds of relief, and then, immediately, of outrage. The crowd pushed in against Matteo. A woman near the gate cried, "Let them have it. What is law to a fever?" Her voice was flat and cutting. Matteo moved back, his authority slipping as neighbors spoke their needs aloud. A neighbor called out a name. Matteo took coins last market day, another echoed with detail. He signed the permit with the merchant's seal. Those specifics hardened into proof in the space of minutes. In the scuffle that followed, a man tried to wrench the parchment from Matteo's arm. Matteo resisted, hands shoved, and the apprentice shouted for calm. There were 3 rapid exchanges of voice between Matteo and the mob. "Stay back! Show the receipts! You will endanger us all." Each line came sharp and short. Aldo did not shout. He moved with hands that had carried heavy pails for years. He stepped between Matteo and the mother and pushed the empty pail gently toward the man who had offered grain. "Take the empty. Aldo, keep it warm. When night comes, bring more jars here. We will not let the child be empty tonight." The offer was action, not speech. Neighbors began to hand over cups and jars. One by one they named what they could spare. A baker gave a cracked stoneware cup. A tinker offered a half, full barrel. The action was a communal decision to share, to protect the sick despite the risk of punishment. Matteo's stance finally broke. He pressed his parchment to his chest and said in a lower voice, "If you continue this, I will record names. I will file reports." He read the law the way someone reads a prophecy, and his voice contained fear of losing control rather than pity. The crowd answered with quiet facts. A woman said, "We will record names too. We remember who took coins when there was no permit." Others nodded. The shift from fear of punishment to mutual accountability moved the group. The warden's threat no longer had the same force when the people could name specific trades and traders. That conversion from individual distrust to communal protection altered the emotional course for Aldo. The suspicion that had tightened his hands in the reeds released into a locked focus. He gave concrete instructions. Mark jars with a shallow notch, place jars under the baker's awning at sundown, send a runner to the spring at odd hours to avoid the gate. Each instruction was a practical measure, not a speech. Rosa and Aldo worked together to open the larger channel for the morning. Rosa used a flat stone to beat a slight trough. Aldo carried a ceramic jar to catch the flow. Their movements were precise, practiced. The apprentice watched, then left to stand at the gate and relay information. By late morning, what had been a private theft at dawn had become a makeshift, visible sharing network. Matteo moved among the crowd like someone trying to stitch a torn coat. He made notes on his parchment. He questions. He attempted to assert the charter with small, measured sentences. The crowd answered with small compensations. A man pushed a burlap bag of barley toward Aldo. Another handed Rosa a strip of cloth for bandages. The priest of a small chapel walked past without speaking and left 2 clay cups on a doorstep. The community's choices changed the immediate outcome. The child slept with a cooler forehead and a damp cloth on his brow. That concrete act counted. Aldo sat by lamplight that evening and held an emptied pail in his lap. The child slept on a pallet beneath a thin sheet. Aldo's hands smelled of reeds and cold water. He moved his thumb over a small scab near the rim of the pail, where his palm had worn leather thin. The action of tracing the scab was the physical record of a day. Matteo came that night, later than the others, his coat folded against the damp. He did not carry a torch. He set his parchment on a table and placed his palm over it as if to still the paper. He nothing at first. When he finally spoke, he used short sentences. "There will be an inquiry. Matteo, I will look into permits. I will speak with merchants." Aldo answered plainly, "Look carefully. If you find bribes, give us names. If you find order, tell us where it comes from. We will follow an honest rule." His tone contained no flourish. It named a choice. Matteo looked at the sleeping child. His mouth moved once, as if tasting an answer. He reached into his coat and drew out a small coin, not a bribe but a single copper. He set it on the table and left without another word. Neighbors continued to bring jars over the next days. They organized shifts to fetch water from the hidden spring at dawn and dusk, always careful so the city patrols would not notice every single trip. Rosa kept careful notes on who took what and when. Aldo kept his walking rote steady. The apprentice who had run to the gate became a small messenger between the gate and the reed bank, his steps more measured. A week later, the warden's inquiry named several merchant names and a ledger. The market men were fined and the receipts were declared irregular. Matteo read the report aloud to a gathered small crowd and then set down the parchment. He apologized in practical terms. He explained the procedure for reporting malfeasance and promised oversight. He did not make a speech about justice. He listed steps. Rosa and Aldo continued their careful sharing, but they also began to register jars the way Matteo had requested. Names, small marks, a rotation list. They built a routine that made it harder for one man to claim any single source. The action of adding names to a list became a civic device, rather than a declaration. In the evenings, Aldo walked the narrow lane and checked jars on windowsills. He knocked on 3 doors each night to make sure someone who had taken a jar earlier had enough. The knocks were soft and practical. The replies were guarded but grateful. The child's mother came each night to give thanks in short sentences. He drank, he slept. Thank you, Aldo always answered with a small, practical reply. Watch the jar tonight. Bring it back at dusk. No grand words, only work. 2 weeks after the dawn at the Reeds, the child walked across the lane to where Aldo stood by a lamp. The child's legs were wobbly. His cheeks were rosier. He carried a chipped cup with both hands and offered it to Aldo as if it were a small payment. Aldo took the cup and turned it in his palms. He set it down on the table, then looked up and said, "Keep walking, keep the cup by the window, fill it when the bell tolls." His instruction was an ordinary duty, not a promise of transformation. That night, when the lamplight had burned low and the neighbors had returned to their rooms, someone knocked at the door twice. Aldo opened it to find the apprentice standing there with a quiet face and 2 small clay jars balanced in his hands. "From the bakery," the apprentice said, "for the child. The baker says keep them warm." He did not offer any more of an explanation. Aldo accepted the jars with both hands and placed them on the windowsill. He closed the door with a soft push, then sat back down and folded his fingers over the empty pail. He felt tired along the edges of his shoulder blades, but his chest was without the knot that had tightened earlier that dawn. The day's choices had been made. The law had been tested and altered. A ledger and a list had replaced a sealed authority. Neighbors had shown what they would risk for one another. Outside, the street settled into ordinary noises. A dog trotted a cart, squealed once, and then was still. A distant bell counted the hour. Inside, the child slept more steadily. Aldo ran his thumb over the worn brass of his yoke until the metal felt smooth and warm from his touch. He set the empty pail on the table beside the jars and blew the wick of the lamp low. A knock came again, single and deliberate. 3 minutes later, Aldo moved to the door and opened it. Matteo stood there, coat damp, eyes steady. He handed over a small folded paper, a new city-issued list with stamped names and a short note that reads simply, "Oversight begins tomorrow." Aldo took the paper, slid it into his inside pocket, and closed the door. He laid the paper atop the empty pail and then leaned forward to pat the child's shoulder. The child's breathing made a soft rhythm. The lamplight trembled once, then held. The chapter closed on the quiet action of a man placing a paper on a table and a child breathing evenly under a thin blanket.